Hi and welcome. For today's Daz Chat on Friday, February the 18th, we have Jon Knowles, and he will present the topic of alphabetics, and he will have some guests with him that will show you and detail how they did their alphabetics experiments with him, and that would involve Debra Katz, Elisa, Henni, Christine, and Julia. Jon Knowles will start off with an informal presentation on the Stargate efforts, and then they'll report on two experiments he and other viewers recently undertook. It's going to be a great chat, very informative, lots of really great information, and really a really great first step forward looking at remote viewers trying to get the really hard topic of numbers and letters in remote viewer sessions. Enjoy the talk. Take care. So I'm going to hand over to Jon Knowles. I think all of you here pretty much know him because I can see your names here from all the previous meetings. I'll let Jon give an introduction on what you're going to do tonight. It's going to like a fantastic and very interesting discussion and presentation. So yeah,
Okay.
take it away, Jon. Thank you, Jon, as well for doing this. I know you've put a lot of work into this one.
Well, thank you, Daz, for hosting again, and it's good to be back on the Daz chat. You see a lot of friends and familiar faces. I'm going to share my screen. If I can find my, here we go. So let me reduce this here. Okay, so this is going to be on alphabetics, which is the front half of alphanumerics, the letters and words and phrases that you can get, but that we have trouble getting in remote viewing. Of course, alphanumerics includes the numbers too. So this is going to be kind of like a smorgasbord or a kind of an open house because there are going to be lots of people who are going to be mentioned and some taking part. So I'm going to begin the slideshow now. The purpose here is to see what's behind the alphabetics door, to convey the promise of alphabetics experiments done at SRI, to learn from Tom McNear's success with phonetics. Tom was kind enough to share some slides for this presentation. To report on two experiments exploring the potential of a new approach, terminal salience, and to stimulate interest in conducting further experiments in alphabetics and alphanumerics. I'm going to read a lot of what's on the slides for those who are phoning in and don't see the screen, but it is being recorded, so the full text will be available later. So I'll do a slideshow about 35 to 40 minutes. Then there'll be comments by Debra, Elisa, Henni, and Lily on the two terminal salience experiments, brief question and answer, then some alphabetics experiments done by Julia, Ashley, and Christine separately, not part of the experiments we did, and then more question and answer and discussion running hopefully around 2 hours. But let's start with the basics here. This window, it's all right. So we can, in remote viewing, we get sensory impressions, although we don't often get nose impressions, smells very strongly, at least most of us don't. Many targets are real life scenes from which we get visuals and other sensory impressions, which are often distorted, unclear, or not well defined. We are gifted with this simple perceptual mechanism, which that's not simple at all, especially when you consider the brain and all of the feedback and forward and backward feedback loops that the brain conducts to make objects that we can see out there in the world. We sense shapes and borders with our various visual processing devices in the brain. We can sense textures and colors, but we find numbers hard. Live a happy life, change your perception about 369 numbers. I don't know who this guy is. I just found this online and I thought it was apropos. We seldom get numbers parachuting down from a great airplane in the sky, but sometimes we do, as Debra and I note in our book on associative remote viewing. Sometimes there has been success in the lottery for one thing in getting numbers, but generally it's quite hard. Also, words can be difficult. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if people are seeing this problem that I have here with a visuals anyway. So words can be difficult, even simple nouns can be difficult, which is why this advice is widespread: describe, don't name. Or as Wittgenstein said, only describe, don't explain. So how would you describe love without using the word love? You would use something cute like this, maybe, that would do a good job. Now, we can sometimes match the target. So in many remote viewing approaches, the viewer does mention nouns, even though people are advised to describe using adjectives and verbs and so forth and not nouns. But sometimes the viewer will mention noun, or the analyst certainly will conclude that there are certain nouns. And so you can match the target at a general level, which I'll explain in the next slide. At the basic level, which is common, or at the subordinate level, which is rare in embodied mind theory. Is there anybody seeing a window here that's blocking the top part, or is it okay?
I'm seeing it, John.
Yeah, we can see it, John. It kind of fades in and out. I've never seen it before. I don't know what that is.
It says to move this window away. Well, I'm not able to do that. Well, I'm just going to continue this. Well, I really need to for this slide. Well, I guess I'll just have to explain it. So at the top in the center, there's the word basic, and under it is dog, building, and so forth. That's the basic level in embodied mind theory, which is a mainstream cognitive research field. And I found that it's very appropriate to describe remote viewing data that's the data mainly comes in at that level. It doesn't come in at the subordinate level, the column to the right, where you have Fido, Route 66, Great Pyramid. Sometimes it does, though, and usually it's written as an AOL in CRV type methodologies. So when someone says they're matching the target, I've noticed some people lately say, well, I got a road or I got a building. So yes, you've matched the target at that level. But we're also talking about the difficulty and the importance of matching at the subordinate level, because if you can name something with a person's name or a place and so forth, that would be even more important for remote viewing. So now looking at the past a little bit about past work that's been done on this subject of alphabetics. Here's a mother and her son were recorded over the telephone, and letters or numbers were presented to the mother, and the replies of the son were recorded, as well as the mother's remarks. Over 30% of the letters or numbers were guessed correctly the first time. So keep that 30% figure in mind. And the authors here in 1968 thought this could be a case of telepathy. As I say, Tom McNear, who was Ingo's favorite viewer, gave permission to use 5 slides of his on phonetics. He was, of course, a Stargate expert viewer for Ingo, and he also has been presenting at the APP in recent years. So this was Tom's first ever stage 7. He was a controlled remote viewer, and this emerged spontaneously. Looking at the bottom, it is pointed out that during Site 25, the viewer experienced 2 new phenomena that we can expect. That of lifting his hands into the air and beginning to model the site in 3-dimensionality, and the emergence of phonetics. Both these phenomena were spontaneous and were not summoned forth by the training monitor. In the case of Kariba Dam, the phonetic that came forth was Karib. So the emergence of phonetic signals on S6, it is noted that during S6 work, the trainee begins to encounter certain signals that are of verbal content. Here too, we have called these phonetic, and we believe that they should appropriately constitute stage 7 and the research and development relevant to it. Jazz made me the co-host, so I keep getting these messages of people coming in, which I have to pause to click out of. So this is the first time, and it was labeled S7. And here's another slide by Tom, the relationship between sounds at the site. There can be sounds at the site, water rushing and so forth, and then sounds about the site, which is the alphabetics that we're interested in. They can be vowels, consonants, syllables, words, names, or just knowing. And here's some of the examples of ones that Tom got, 11 instances of stage 7 phonetics. So again, under the phonetics column, we have Carib for the Caribe Dam. You got the Saint, the St. Patrick's Cathedral. You got Stan for the Stanford Linear Accelerator. You got Buker, Bucher for Bunker Hill National Monument. Toulouse for the Tulum Pyramid, and other data, which we'll look at also in the next slide. So Tom is actually the champion so far in terms of getting exact matches at this subordinate level in remote viewing theory, in embodied mind theory. And he got these in 1984, and we can't say that the field has advanced much since then, unfortunately. But Tom has some really good advice about how to pursue this. So here's his recommendations. Sense and feel calmly and clearly, being careful not to rush to judgment or conclusion, but to go on sensing. Sense, listen, and feel with your mind. Write it down, sounds, syllables, words, knowings. If your mouth wants to speak, let it. Write what you're hearing your mouth say. Try to articulate, but stick with what feels correct. Don't embellish. Stick with what you are perceiving. Too little is probably better than too much. Better to get a few accurate sounds than to introduce AOL, analytic overlay. Be spontaneous and do a prompt for stage 7, like saying name and take what comes to you. Prompt, don't imagine. So now looking also at other Stargate material, because Tom was part of the Stargate project, of course, too. But this is the report by Ed May and Sonali Bhatt Marwaha, 4 volumes, Stargate Archives. Well worth reading if you really want to get into the details in a comprehensible and easy to find way. They're expensive, these 4 volumes, but they're definitely worth reading, and they're the definitive history to date. So they did experiments at SRI, Stanford Research Institute, with letters and with words. These have not been talked about much, but they actually a little surprising. In addition to what I'm going to show, in our book, Debra Katz and I covered alphanumerics and have more examples from the Stargate archives. So here, some letters were chosen, target letters A, B, I, O down below there. And the statistics were so impressive, 1 in 105, that the technique will be taught, the training device in alphabet reading will be continued. But I don't think this was actually carried out. I'm sorry, this technique will be pursued as a training device in alphabet reading. This is from 1976. And Tom's experiments were from 1984, were several decades later. Here's another experiment where a viewer who was good was asked to make a drawing and describe it in a non-analytic fashion. Someone else would look at the drawing and the description and make the final assessment as to what the letter was. So in the first drawing, she drew J's, and she thought it could be a U, but she wasn't sure. Hal Puthoff was the judge, and he clearly identified it on a blind basis as a U, just a single letter. Following day, second experiment was done, and the viewer drew a lot of V's, and again, Hal Puthoff identified it as a V. These experiments strongly suggest that the way to increase the resolution capability is to arrange to separate the perception from the analysis, to encourage the subject to simply describe his or her perceptions, followed up by having a different person do the final analysis. Again, the results obtained in the remote viewing and machine approaches to reading alphabet characters do indicate, a potential for developing acceptable levels of reliability in reading text for operational purposes. Further study is required to determine whether this reliability can be achieved with a reasonable effort. So never be afraid to try something new, because life gets boring when you stay within the limits of what you already know. In a game, there are so many different variables that are thrown at you: the defense, where your teammates are, how fast your body's moving, and you have to be in control of all these decisions. Stephen Curry, who's the best shooter in the history of the NBA, and he's talking about variables here, which is what I'm referring to. So in other words, what variables to choose to conduct the experiments that we did? It can be very tricky. Another thought: trust your gut instinct over spreadsheets. There are too many variables in the real world that you simply can't put into a spreadsheet. Spreadsheets spit out results from your inexact assumptions and give you a false sense of security. In most cases, your heart and the gut are still your best guide. Well, I'm sure we can relate to that as remote viewers, trusting our body and our gut, but spreadsheets are very important to get data so that you can find out if your results are good or not. So we could have used quite a few different variables in these two experiments that were conducted. So I just made a selection of some. These are very informal experiments. So the targets could have been words, names, phrases, and so forth for alphabetics. I chose to have words, but the focus is on specific letters, but particularly the first and last letter of the word. The form of presentation can vary. It could be text, it could be an image, it could be video. At Stargate and SRI, they used computers and had images on the screen. I just gave text in the form of an Excel file to the viewers, the 4 viewers who took part. As to methods, you could use phonetics, visualization, drawing, just knowing. The guideline was the viewer could use any method they want, and they could even change midstream, because this is highly experimental. Not much work has been done on this, or if it's been done, it hasn't been published or presented on social media. And scoring, there were several methods that I used to score in this first experiment, which I'll explain. So the first experiment I called AB1. It was the names of people from the 19th and 20th century. And I'll explain how that worked in a second. The second experiment was intersections of streets in the United States, the signs on those intersections. So for the first experiment, the team was Debra, Elisa, and myself. The idea was to get names of people or the initial and last letter of their first and last name. The protocol was to do 20 events. The method was to use any method, and it's okay to change method, but keep a record of it. The tasks were going to be the names of person or persons mainly from the 20th century. For example, the governor of Missouri in 1956. That was the tasking. I wouldn't have a clue who that was, but it was easy to look up on Wikipedia. So before getting to that, I have to explain about terminal salience. So what is terminal salience? This is a concept from J.B. Rhine, and it's the occurrence of higher scores at both ends of an EXP experiment. That was the first meaning of terminal salience. So for example, in this, which you can read later in the recording, but basically they found that viewers did better at the first and last sets of cards, of 5 cards in 100 sets. They would do better in the first and last and not in the middle sets. But that meaning of terminal salience is also can apply to letters in a word or a name. There's been mainstream research about perception and understanding when we read. For example, in the exterior letter pairs, I'm reading from the paragraph here, in the word dark, D and K are the terminal letters, first and last. And it says they play a major role in single word recognition, the exterior letter pairs. But other research indicates no such role in reading text. But then the last sentence, the findings suggest that exterior letter pairs play a preferential role, and candidates for this role are discussed. More research about the first 2 and the last 2 letters in this case. Only the first of these conditions produced word priming, that is the first and 2 last letters, not the middle 4 letters and so forth. There's more research about the terminal salience letters and how striking they are in mainstream understanding of perception. So there's an additional reason I was interested in terminal salience, because I was a medical transcriptionist for many years. And when I got into that field, I had to figure out, well, is there some way to type faster than just regular typing. And so I tried to find a typing abbreviation system. And after looking at syllables and letters and so forth, the best rule that I could come up with was the first three letters and the last letter proved to be the most effective letters in designing the basic rule of an effective typing abbreviation system. And there are other rules for prefixes, two-word phrases, and so forth. So I was very interested in the first and last letter to begin with. And this was confirmed by reading some of the research. How this worked in medical transcription was where there are lots of long words, of course. If you look on the right-hand column, number 4, Tyll, that's Tylenol, first three letters and the last. And also there are other rules for two-word phrases and so forth. Anyway, this was used by medical transcriptionists in conjunction with instant text, which is a text expander, and shorthand for Windows, which is another text expander. So putting all that together, I thought, why not try to see if we can get the initial and last letters of the words or names in this particular case, because it's so difficult to get the full name. And I'll get to why I think this might be useful later on, possible uses of this. So again, you've seen this slide. It was on the first experiment that we did, how it was set up. So I used several methods of scoring. The first method one is the percentage of matches of the first and last letter with the target names, counting each instance of a first or last letter in the viewer's session. Method two is the same, but you only count a letter when it occurs once. We'll give an example of that shortly. Method three is the ratio of the number of letters in each target name compared to the number of letters in the names in the viewer's session. 3B is the ratio of the number of syllables in each target name compared to the number of syllables in the viewer's session. And method 4 was an exact match, which of course would be the best, but is very rare. So this is an example of if the data were Peter, P.R, the name Schelling, and M.N, the score would be initial letter 2 P's, 1 S, and 1 M. The last letter would be 2 for R, 2 for G, and 2 for N. I did not mix the letters that viewers had. In other words, if they had it for the initial letter, it counted as the initial letter, and for the last letter, it counted for the last letter. If it was put up as a last letter, it did not get credit as an initial letter. So let's look at the taskings and a couple of examples. So the first tasking, which is on an Excel sheet, was the Nobel Prize winners for medicine and physiology in 1934. Since I didn't know who these were either, I could do these as a viewer. As with all of these, that's the entire tasking. There's no TRN. Each tab contains just one tasking. There's 20 tabs in the Excel file. And you can make up a TRN if you want, or just call it trial 1. So for number 2 is 2 Oklahoma senators in 1917. So as it turned out, this is the only one where I had a correct name. And Elisa, who I'll get to in a minute, had 2 correct names, and we'll look at her example. So this is my session. It was a 7-minute session, just a brief cool down, some image streaming. I decided to do some drawings to see if I could draw the people. I did that for about the first 5 or 6. I don't think that was particularly successful. So here I didn't really have anything that named the senator. The second one, however, I got Thomas, the T. I guess the letter T came to me first, and then the Thomas and Tucker and Tan came to me, or Tom, whatever that is. And then I drew senator number 2. So the disclosure is Thomas Gore was one of the 2 senators. And so the name Thomas was correct, but there's only one instance out of 43 that was correct for the full name for me. Here's the drawing of the other senator, Robert Owen, and I think my drawing slightly resembles him a little better with the hairstyle, but again, not particularly noteworthy. So the feedback that Debra and Elisa got, the other 2 viewers, was of the same form. And that's how they tasked too. They would just see the tasking, and then they used a different Excel file to get the objective. So let's look at Elisa's session, where she got not only the first name, but more. So And she can describe this after the slideshow. The viewers will have a chance to say more about their methods and what they thought about the experiment and so forth. So at the bottom, she gets George V. And then she gets George again, George W, George Whittemer. And as you recall, George Whipple was the actual correct one. So she got the George and the W. She also got the P in William P. Murphy. And because there were two Georges in this feedback, one wonders if the fact that there were two Georges led to her getting the George, getting the name correct. So using scoring method 1, look at the column G and column N and Q and J. You see the percentages at the bottom. In terms of the first and last letters, the figures are around 23, 22, 28, and 30% accurate. You remember I mentioned 30% earlier for the mother and her son over the telephone. This is the kind of territory we're operating in. It's unlike, say, an APP where it's around 50, 55% right now, but we're just starting out. We haven't really explored this. We're around this territory of 20 to 30%. So again, here we have the data from the two viewers, and I won't show all of the feedback names. So the range for the three viewers was 23 to 31% accuracy with the first and letters of names when scoring total session data against the initial and last letters. But for method 2, it was between 19 and 42%. So again, this is the three of us when there were a total of first name 50 letters and last name 46 letters, because some of the taskings had more than one name. As we saw, one of them had 3 names. And again, the percentages are mostly around 30, but from 18 to 42. Scoring method 3 and A and B, I won't go into that, but it looks like there is some possibility that counting the syllables and also the number of letters may also be a useful measure. And as far as the fourth method, getting the exact names, as I say, Lisa had 2, George W and Dan, and I had Thomas, and that's all we got out of 43. So we've got a long ways to go to get the full names. So my suggestion is the number of letters and the number of syllables could be used along with terminal salience to compile a profile of the name and perhaps identify it. And this should be tested with real world cases. So what's the possible use of this if we don't know a person's full name? Well, suppose you have names of multiple suspects in a crime. Terminal salience could help identify the person by knowing the first name and the last name, the initial letter of that name. You could do that. Same with anything really, streets, cities, countries, license plates, billboard signs, passwords, and so forth. Of course, some of these would involve numbers in the alphanumerics, but there may be a role for terminal salience, and I'm interested to know what the other viewers think, as well as other folks who are watching this as a possible method. So experiment 2 was intersections of streets. And this was, here was the goal, was to get the initial and last letters or the full names of 2 streets or avenues that form an intersection. In 4 of these, an event took place on a given day and time. In other words, these are real world experiments. That's what I wanted to do, something out of the real world to show if it would be useful. The 5th one was, I call it a mysterioso intersection. It wasn't a real event. Lily came up with the idea of viewing intersections for this series. We could have done it many different ways, but I thought intersections sounded interesting and worth trying. So in this one, Elisa, Debra, Lily, and Henni were the viewers. I was going to task and evaluate, and Henni kindly volunteered to analyze sessions for intersections 3 and 4 with a decoy situation setup, that is to have other intersections, and she had to pick the right one, the one that was the target. So the location 1 with the Q was viewer will provide information sufficient to identify the names on the streets and road signs at an intersection at or near where a robbery took place on February 10th, 2021. That was the total information given to the viewer. So they're front loaded to that extent. They don't know the city or the state. These are all in the US. And there were no murders or deaths that occurred. I made that known to the viewers, but there were events. And this is the feedback. Often there was a link and then various names, and the Railroad Avenue and Emmanuel Street were the two streets involved in this particular one. So here's the summary of data for locations 1 through 5. There are only 5 events in this experiment. So total letters produced by the viewers is on the left. The number of hits is next, and the opening bracket means the initial letter, and the closed bracket means the last letter, and then the percentages of hits. And you see these are fairly low, from 2% to 9% in this first set here. That's when counting all of the letters that the viewers suggested in their data. On the right-hand side, narrowing it down to just unique letters, not counting repetitions in the data, there were fewer letters, 230 versus 274, and the percentages were slightly higher, with a high of 15%. So for location 3, there was a target and decoys. So this would be an example where if you had many different locations, 5 different locations, and could the analyst figure out which one was the designated one based on the data? So the designated one was Park in Georgia, Northwest. These are all in District of Columbia. And it's in green on the left under choice B, that's Park in Georgia. And you can see that the matching is actually least for Park in Georgia from the viewers than all the other ones. So that made it impossible, I would say, for the analyst to choose the correct one unless you think there's psi missing. But this is just one experiment. It'd be hard to say that that's what occurred. So Henni's analysis is as follows here. Debra and Elisa both got capital W. Debra had a D, which is part of water, and the word word. Elisa noted an N after the W, and so forth. And Lily can talk more about this if she wants to after the slideshow. So my comment was that the intended intersection received the fewest letters, so the analyst really didn't have a chance to choose the correct choice, which this is just one experiment, so, but in this particular case, it would not have been useful. Some more matching from locations 1, 2, and 5. Again, there are percentages that are a little higher though, 25 and 21% on the right-hand column. This is from all 4 viewers now, for just these 3 locations. So the sample size is small, just 3 locations, but the percentages are higher and perhaps indicate that they would be useful even for this, that is for matching intersections. This is just some of the data, what it looked like for the 5 intersections, a selection of the data, not all of the data. That was from all 4 viewers, these 2 slides. Again, this will be up on the recording if you want to examine it more closely. And here's some sheets from some of the viewers. So Lily decided to have words and letters. So on the right-hand column, she has words, and on the left-hand column, the center column, she has symbols and letters. So she had 2 separate categories of data. This is Henni's session. She did a CRV type session, and this is page 5. So previous to this, she did drawings and so forth, and came up with these particular letters. This is one of Elisa's. We saw an earlier session by her. And Debra didn't give me her raw data, but she summarized it as follows. And she can talk about that, although I understand Debra has time limitations. So hopefully there'll be time here for her to comment on her methods here and her understanding and feeling about the experiment. So observations in locations 1, 2, and 5, the percentage of letters of matches are low, and it would be difficult to select initial or last letters of street names based on those percentages. In the 2 locations 3 and 4, which were analyzed along with decoys, the match percentages did not provide a basis for the analyst to be able to select the intended location. But further experimentation might show that terminal salience is a useful approach. This is a new approach and it might take time to develop skill with it. So onwards and upwards. The end is just the beginning. And this is my information about the book that Debra and I wrote, which has the chapter on alphabetics or alphanumerics and other information. And so that's the end of the slideshow. So Daz, there we are.
Great stuff. On your schedule, was it time to ask questions now, or are we moving on to one or the other?
We're moving on to the 4 viewers who might want to comment. And
Okay.
since Debra, I think, has a difficult schedule right now. Debra, are you there?
Yes. Hi.
There she
Hi,
is.
John.
Hi.
I'm here. Very nice presentation. Yeah, sorry,
you.
I'm gonna have to, I still have about 20 minutes and then I have to get to a doctor's appointment. But I can just say a few words and nothing really all that enlightening. I feel like we're just so much at the start of exploring this. And I would say for myself, I don't really feel like I have a handle yet on letters and numbers. John mentioned that I didn't provide raw data to him, but actually I did. There was no raw data because my approach was not to do this as a formal remote viewing setup, but more, I would say, just clairvoyance or ERV. I basically did this while I was going to sleep at night, and then I would just type notes into my iPhone. And I don't think that was particularly an effective approach. I did find, in different remote viewing approaches, we can just kind of sit there with our paper and let the information come to us, or we can go look for the information, so at a location we can send ourselves out and move around and explore. And I tend to like to do that, although sometimes I'm just sitting at my paper waiting for it to come in. So I felt like this, I had a constant question, like, where is the information? Where do I put my attention? So for the second project, I knew that there were street signs. So I thought, well, I can go over to these 2 street signs and check them out. But then I had a feeling of overwhelm because it was two signs. And it just seemed to me that maybe there was kind of too much information or too much going on. And at the same time, I don't feel like I was giving this my all as far as, sitting down with my paper and just maybe doing, I know Henni will talk a little bit later about how I think she went through a remote viewing session first and really got dialed in and then seemed to have more results. And I feel like that would be a good way to approach this. So I pretty much saw both what I needed to do better. And then also, I would say, coming back to this idea of where is the information, I think it would be easier if I think I still need to work that out. There was one time where I decided, actually maybe 2 or 3 times, I decided, okay, I have to find where the information is. So I thought, well, I know John is creating an Excel sheet, or he has an Excel sheet with this information in it. So I imagined I was not just like touching the entry of the cell of the Excel sheet, but I tried to insert myself into the cell, like as if I was crawling inside the Excel sheet. And at that moment, so it was totally dark in my room and I had my phone not lit up. It was kind of turned off next to me. And as soon as I started to send myself into the Excel sheet, suddenly my room lit up and my phone was just flashing. Like it flashed for like 15 seconds, just the screen. And so I felt like, oh my gosh, like what just happened here? I felt like there was some kind of PK effect. And then for like the next 2 or 3 trials, I did the same kind of thing. And each time I had something very bizarre happen on my phone, like I went to pick it up and then it started to change colors on the screen. And so I thought, well, maybe this reminded me of what I've learned with Ingo's work, where, you know, it was when he either had to try to influence the quark detector under the cement, or he had to influence the heat thermometer. He had the success. He wasn't successful until he said to himself he was going to really focus very intently on the mechanisms to understand how they worked, like through his clairvoyance. And so I'm thinking maybe there was a PK effect like that when I actually got dialed in and really worked at the focus. So I would say just this just showed me, if that is true, that there was a PK effect. And I do think on those I did get like maybe one letter. I felt like, at least for that, might have been one of the ones where I had a little bit more success. So I'm thinking just overall, this was a good reminder of how important it is to make sure we're dialed into the right target, and not just assume, you know, we could just sit down and we're just going to immediately find the target, you know. So how do we find it? Where do we put our attention? And then I would say, in terms of the experimental setup, I think if it was, things were just a little bit simpler, maybe with less digits. I don't know if, John, you mentioned the experiment by the Chinese researchers, where they, I think one of the lead researchers, his last name is Dong, D-O-N-G, and he just had an article published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration, I think 2 issues back. And there was one girl who had really amazing results, where there were 5 digits. She knew they were always going to be 5-digit letters and numbers together. And I think out of 50, what was it? She got like 6 completely correct, like not just all the right letters and numbers, but she got them in the exact correct row. And then she had like many more that were almost correct. So I feel like I'd like to try something like that next, which it would be, we'd know that confined number of digits and maybe start there, even though I feel like, John, what you did here is ultimately what viewers or any kind of intuitives are going to need to be able to do, because out in life, you're not just confined to 5 numbers or letters. So I feel like I want to maybe go to something simpler and work up to what you did here. I felt like this was a little too advanced, maybe.
Thank you, Deborah. I would point out that the researchers had to travel over North China for miles and miles and miles to find one person out of the hundreds and hundreds or thousands that could do this. But nonetheless, it was an amazing result. So, Elisa, would you like to comment on your impressions?
Sure. First of all, thank you for including me in this experiment, John. What I did for AB1 was kind of different than what I did for the second one. But I didn't do a cool down. First of all, I'm not the type of person that does cool downs, but I did do a transit line, which is my kind of way of focusing, I guess. And then what I found was that I've done similar kinds of things before. I have a history of kind of doing either looking for passwords or kind of doing some kind of alphabetics and numerics. That ideograms kind of work well. And I've also tried spaces and branching out techniques. And so for this one, I thought I'd do the ideogram. And so that's what I did. And I kind of traced it with my other hand. What I found was that doing the initial ideogram kind of worked. I could pick up some of the letters, or at least part of the first word, and that maybe that ideogram needed to be broken down more. And I also felt like I was getting some visual flashes of names. I was hearing, the name. And so I was also going to the person, seeing the person, kind of like what John was doing, feeling what the person was looking like, and so on and so forth. For a lot of this, just trusting that information and writing it down, especially for the first part, that's what I did. For the second, I would say, for AB1, I really trusted that more. But I felt more tired, I guess more exhausted from that tasking. Whenever we went to AB2, it was a lot different. Even though I've done scenarios like that in the real world and operational, it was odd. I had this kind of cubic effect. That's how I explained it to Jon and to Henni and to Debra and others. It was like I was being pulled to an initial target and then being drawn out, and then kind of having to refocus myself back in. It was a strange experience for me. It was really hard to stay focused to where they wanted me to go and stay there. It took a lot of concentration for me to do that. And then I kind of felt like I was being pulled around into whatever activity was happening. And I had to say, no, don't do that. Concentrate on the street sign, And so I was really strict about that in my session. And because I thought, I'm not going to get credit for this, And so I tried to just draw the street sign, the physical street sign, and do like an intersection and kind of either jump into the body of the person if I was getting pulled into the person, and then look up and look around, which is what I used to do, like in missing persons and things like that, and see what can I see, and then do the best I can at that. And the other thing that happened to me with AB2 was that I did get a name, but it was a name that was associated with a person.
Right.
It was my ex-husband's family street name. And so I thought, I'm just going to ignore this and push it aside. But it ended up being an actual, if I would have wrote it down, it would have been a hit.
Right.
So I should have just, I'll share that with you. When it comes in, just, write it down. And so I kicked myself for it. I wrote the T, I wrote the R, and then all of a sudden I just got that visual flash. And then I even heard it. I heard the name, and I just was like, no, I'm not going to put that down. And so, what would it have cost me? It would just have been one more word, but I didn't put it down. And so I found it funny afterwards when I got the feedback. But I do like to use the ideograms. I find that they work well, and then kind of expand on that. If I find like I'm doing the ideogram, it's not working, then I'll refocus myself. I'll actually write down refocus, and then I'll do it again. And I feel like I can kind of get more of the letter or more of the word. And so for me, that works.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Elisa. And also, we can see already the variety of methods that viewers can use. And you could say that you're either approaching this hot or cold, meaning you just want to get the name, or are you going to do a full session or drawings of people or something to get it? And Henni did a full session, or at least a longer session to get it. So Henni, do you want to talk about your impressions too, please? You're muted. Henni, are you there?
I never did any kind of scientific work outside of CRV, so I had no other methodology to rely on than what I know, which is CRV. And I figured that I'm usually good at visuals, so what if I try to read those signs, but then I have to be at the target and get to stage 3 at least, enough to have maybe possibly visuals. So what I did, I was trying not to focus on the event or the activity. Basically, it was front-loaded anyway, so we knew it was a robbery, we knew it was some physical I don't know what the name of the second target that I've used for, and there was the Misterioso, which we know that the name of the road probably changed. So I was trying not to focus on the activity as much as trying to get on the location. I treated all three targets as a location target, as I would do a location target. I tried to find impressions of the surrounding, and I drew it as best as I could, basically for a feedback for you as an analyst to see if I'm at all on target or not. Because I figured that I wouldn't want Jon to believe that reading signs is not possible. And the reason why I'm not getting the letters is because I'm not on target. So I wanted to give him visual clues that he can check whether I'm on target or not. And when I was in stage 3, just like Elisa, I was, okay, I'm in stage 3, I can use move. So move to the street sign and try to read it. So this is what I did. And the experience was pretty strange because it was really blurry and shapes were like morphing into one another. So I was just trying to draw down the shapes that I was seeing in the order that they appeared. And sometimes words popped up in my mind and I just set them aside as stray cats. So I had the graphics, the visuals, and I had words as stray cats. Personally, I felt that it became easier to do this kind of target with every trial. So by the time I was doing the third, I felt it was less of a stretch. At the first time, it was really weird because I was never asked to try and read something. And so I had this feeling of, okay, I have to pin down the event, then I have to pin down the location, then I have to find the sign, and then I have to find the letters, and I have to make sure that I'm reading the first and the last letter, and that was a bit overwhelming at first. But like the second and the third got easier. And I think the third target was location-wise the best target, and it is not the best target in terms of letters because I only had an initial S and ending T, but it was the first time that I had a word which had the exact initial and the exact finishing of the first sign, which was spiritualist or something, and I had like shiny bow and stuff like that. So I felt some form of progression, but it is true that it was pretty overwhelming because it was an activity and at a location, and then we had two street signs. But I feel it's something that can be getting easier by practice. So I enjoyed it actually.
Well, thank you so much, Henni, for volunteering to analyze that very difficult situation, and for all the viewers who were willing to take part in this thing that's been considered impossible, basically, or at least very difficult. I really appreciate that. Now, Lily has told me that she has laryngitis and can't speak. So she'd asked me to read her comments. So I'm going to do that. And then I see Demi has a question up. So I'm going to read Lily's comments about her viewing. So she says, for this series of targets, I focused on only the first and last letters of each of the two street names for the taskings. Remember, she was just in AB2, the second experiment. I used two separate methods simultaneously, trying to perceive visuals to make out letters and noting any words that would come into my mind while I focused on visual shapes that were formed. The words came more easily than the visuals, and I would quickly reach 5 words. By this point, I didn't feel that I could continue trying to get visual forms because this would allow more words to come into the session, and I'd end up with too many words. And so I felt as if I needed to drop the first street and move on to the cross street, during which I allowed another 5 words for an approximately total of 10 per tasking. This simultaneous dual method did not allow me the time that I felt I needed to spend on perceiving the shapes to a point where I felt satisfied that I knew which one letter I was seeing. As a result, the visual portion of my session felt prematurely cut off in every case. The shapes and lines were somewhat crude, and although I felt I knew which letters each of them represented, I did not declare any letters, and I left the shapes as raw data for the analyst. It might appear as if my words were more reliable than the letters that were deciphered from my shapes and lines. But had I declared the letters that I got within my sessions, 3 additional matching letters would have been counted for a total of 6 letters. This would have made the scoring more favorable toward my letters, as well as an even balance of hits between the first letter and the last letter of the street names using the visual letter method. This is in contrast to the viewer's overall scoring, which would tend to favor the first letter compared to the last letter when the viewer method involved entire words. I feel that terminal salience is a valid system with potential. Since I felt there was a learning curve, I didn't think our results necessarily displayed the system's true potential efficacy. I would imagine that a person who has settled on a method that works effectively for them could achieve fairly good hit rates using terminal salience. I'll stop there. There's just a little bit more, but I think that was the essence. I've lost, Daz, can you take over? I've lost the slideshow. Where is it? Okay. I mean, I've lost, okay. Yeah, go ahead, Daz. Here we go. All right. There, I'm back. Okay.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Yeah. So that completes the 4 viewers. And the idea was that we would open up for a brief question and answer, and then have Christine, who did independent work, and Julia, who did independent work, talk about their methods. So we really have a huge open house smorgasbord kind of approach to this field, which has been relatively undeveloped. So Demi, you have a question, right? Do we have to, how do we do that? Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I know the final goal of this experiment was to see the letters or the names of the persons or the streets. But my question is, I saw also the approach of all the viewers, but my question is, could it take into consideration the kind of the AOLs that were appearing during the session, like maybe somehow they're saying something about the names or about the letters, or fits on some patterns on our mind, on their minds, that could be aligned with the names or with the numbers or with the letters, of course. So my question is, I understand from Elisa that the straight's name was perfect for her to, but she didn't put it down. She didn't write it down. But could it try to find an approach like a conceptual one? Like, let's say it's about George. We have an AOL as a king, like King George or something, and to make from that moment back to the letters, or the final goal and the only goal was to see the letters and the names. Sorry for the long.
Well, if I understand what you're suggesting or asking, yes, the goal would be to get the full name if you can get it. But as we see, we had 3 instances, and Tom McNair, I think, had 19. That's the top number that we don't know how many total he tried, but he got 19. We only mentioned 11 here in the slideshows, but that is very difficult. So the idea is to have the terminal salience as an alternative, one of several possible alternatives. And in terms of analogies, like with King George, if the viewer goes that way, then that might help. Absolutely. You know, maybe some viewers are particularly metaphorical or analogically oriented, and that would serve them. So I'm not sure if I spoke to what you were asking or mentioning.
Well, there was an example of maybe like what I did for orange, maybe with the O and the E when I was doing that one. And actually it was olive, you know what I mean? I was seeing something hanging on a tree, but I could only see the first and the last letter very clearly on that, you know, so I was having trouble with the other part. It was blurry. you know, but it felt like kind of some fruit or something. I, yeah.
Yeah, really, I would say our goal here is to be getting the numbers and the letters. So I think one thing this really starts to show us is how easy everything else really is, like, because we almost can't help but sometimes having that other information come in. But that would be a really cool project to have, like a picture for George Washington for George, or, you know, pictures all along with the names, just to see what would happen and if maybe that would help the name itself to come in just as a, you know, project. I think that'd be super cool to try that. And also you mentioned that was the goal, to see the letters. And, you know, I think that the question of, are we seeing the letters? Are we hearing them? I think that was part of my confusion, because I was just trying to let it all happen as it was happening. And I wasn't like specifically only trying to see the word. And I think a lot of what I would call junk words were floating in. I think this is also what Lily was saying, with so many words, they just start to flow in, and it's a lot of noise, though maybe something in there is helpful. So maybe part of the problem is we have these multiple channels with information flowing in and out, and we haven't yet done this enough to know, you know, do I really need to shut down the auditory channel and just look at the physical shape of the letters versus, you know, the other way around?
I think I think what you're going to find through training is, you know, as we all know, what's going to work for one viewer is going to work better for you, and so on and so forth. It's going to be individualized, but through training, maybe you can make it better and better. I mean, we were just kind of offered this experiment, and I think we did pretty great considering, you know, but if you're offering this as an adjunct to regular remote viewing training, which I think it should be, you know, that this is just a part of training, then you're going to see viewers just get better and better. So, but I don't think you can just kind of do this and then stop, and then this has to be something that keeps training.
Okay, thanks. I think we should move along to the 4 questions and then have Christine and Julia, because I know they've been working really hard, and I want to hear, and I think others are going to want to hear what they have to say too. So let's do the 4 people who have their hands up and then move to Christine and Julia. Okay, so David, you're next.
Hi, I've got 2 questions. I'll try and make them very quick though. So I noticed that Henni did best on the intersections task and is not a native English speaker, and that Elisa had the thing of self-censoring because it had some significance. Do you think that possibly having less analytical interference because of familiarity with the words and going, oh, it can't be that, it's more likely to be this, might be affecting accuracy? Because actually I can make this one question, because we know that letter occurrences in the English language have different frequencies, and you know there's not very many Z's and so on. Did you look at the expected frequency of letters as the first and last letter, and then look at the letters the viewers reported and see whether the viewer's accuracy correlates with how closely they match the distribution of first and last letters?
Let me answer that, and then Henni might want to talk about the language. So yeah, E-T-A-O-I-N are the most common letters. I did not do an analysis on that basis. That would be something also to put in when we have a lot of money to do research or time. And Henni, do you want to talk about the language issue?
I'm not sure if the language was, I mean, I told the other viewers, and John Marie had a session or a Skype session after the project trials were down, that because I was so freaking out that I'm gonna fail this, I made a few practice targets for myself, but they were like logos. And I had from Greek to Chinese characters and all kinds of things in them, and I was going for the visuals. So I tried a few because I wasn't sure actually that I mean, the locations could have been anywhere. So I had to keep in mind that it's not necessarily, I mean, if you've seen the tasking, it was not saying that it's in the US. So I kept in mind that it might be a location in China or Moscow or anywhere. And I had some practice targets for myself with all kinds of alphabets, even ones that I don't know. And I usually, like, I was using my visuals. So NS will look NS. So it's
So I guess you were consciously not having the assumption that they were going to be English sounding things. What about the other viewers? Just very briefly, did anybody else have any preconceived ideas about whether the intersections were going to be in the US or elsewhere, or the language?
I didn't, and like I averaged like four, or five thing. Oh, I guess you can't see the page. Sorry. I didn't write a lot of street names down. So I tried to stay pretty strict. So
The viewers
Yeah.
were told it was going to be U.S. states and so forth, where all of the intersections were.
Yeah, I think I thought it was all going to be in English. That's a good question, though. That was just my assumption.
Yeah.
Well, you've got the data, so the analysis could be done at a later date.
Yeah.
Because the distribution of first and last letters for street names is going to be different for letters in general in the English language. So it just struck me that Henni did the best.
Okay, thank you, David. Daz.
It's not a question really, it's just an observation. I was just wondering if maybe the use of the names for the Nobel laureates and the street signs was just too much information that wasn't needed. Maybe it might have been better, or a future study, because this was a fantastic start, might be better with 3 to 5 letter words, just a single word written black, really bold on a sheet of paper, without the added noise of having it being a name of a person with a history, or a road sign on a street somewhere in the US, with all the noise that those kind of things might add to the situation.
Yeah, in the Stargate archives, Joe McMonagle reports on they're using a single word, and he got I think he got a couple out of 5 or so. Then there were 4-letter words, and then there was another experiment they did with single words. But me, I wanted to jump to something operational, real world right away. But absolutely, you're right, and they were right. But since I'd seen their results, and they weren't dynamite either, so I thought, well, let's just try this other one. So we see how hard intersections are, and clearly going back to basics would be definitely a good way forward.
Yeah, I think it's very similar to what most of us do when we try to do the lottery. For example, in the UK, I tried to do the Euro Millions, which is essentially 14 digits in sequential order. And just trying to do an attempt like that out of nowhere without building myself up first, of literally just trying to get one single digit number and then building up to 2 dunders and so on, I think we're asking a bit too much of ourselves straight out the gate. But it was a great experiment, and it's looking like it's got lots of promise.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, but for sure, do the pick 3 before you do the pick 4.
Yeah.
So Don, okay.
Okay, so John, I guess I missed this during the presentation, or maybe it wasn't mentioned, but did you prime the targets for the viewers in any way? In other words, there's supposed to be a methodology for creating a remote viewing target, and some people meditate over the target, others write it down or gather pictures or write the target in text form in some sort of document.
Bingo.
Whatever. So my question is, was there any sort of like pre-priming of the target?
There was no forward priming nor retro priming as understood in usual psychological experiments. There was front loading, and that people knew that there were names of people who existed in the past, nothing precognitive about this. But no, there was no priming that I'm aware of, unless the viewers themselves tried to somehow do some priming. But as a tasker, I did not.
Now, okay, All right. I was going to say, do you think priming would have helped? But that's sort of speculation. So I withdraw the question.
Okay, I will just say, yes, I do think priming helps, by the way, but since the question was withdrawn, I won't say any more either.
Okay.
Right. Okay, so Dad, you still have your hand up. No, okay, so Jaime? You're up.
Hi, Amy here.
Okay.
Yeah, hi. I can totally relate to, I think her name was Elisa earlier, said that she didn't write down the name that came as, and it was a hit. That happened to me recently in an operational target. And it was the nickname for the person who was the target. And I got several of the words that started with that correct letter. And I don't know, I have to look back in my session to see like if I had some that also ended with a correct word. But I have gotten targets also out of what do you call it? When I'm doing a positive precog session and I get a word like from the target itself, I've gotten that a couple different times at least. And then I've also gotten numbers before, but like just one digit at a time. I think I've gotten two total numbers out of all of the different ones I've had. But I haven't had that many word targets in my experiences. So I'm interested in trying these, to get more proficient there. And I was thinking that maybe it would be helpful if we decided to assign each number with a color, because I noticed that I'm pretty good at getting like flashes of the color from the target. And I've gotten even all of the colors from a target before, which was really fun. And so I thought maybe if I assign each one like we do with the ideograms and the elements. So if we did a color for the thing and then maybe textures for some of the alphabet or something, I don't know, like the main ones that are going to be used enough. But maybe that would be helpful if I don't know if anybody has tried that before.
Well,
Some people would, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Elisa.
I was just going to say some people with synesthesia already have that, association. I know that I associate numbers with colors a lot. And, but yeah, I'm sure you can do that.
Yeah, Ed May and others, and Elisa just said, synesthesia may play a fundamental role in remote viewing, actually, not just for letters and numbers. The point I was going to make was that the Washington State used to have a lottery with colors for the numbers. And I wish they did, because I think that would be a lot easier, but I have yet to find another lottery that has color. But I think you're right. That's another way to go, to try to have the tasker do some associations with colors to see if that would help with letters. Yeah. So thanks for that. So I think Christine, who's been waiting patiently here and who's been really working hard on this, and Julia, Christine, you're up.
Thank you. Thank you, John, for including me in your circle, your little circle of working with this. Really had a fun time. How I went about it was I was in Pam Cornell's class, or psychic detective class, and we talked about license plates. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool just to get the license plate right to the chase and catch the bad guy, So I started doing alphanumerics, and how I decided to do it was just, it's fun for me. It wasn't, there's nothing scientific about it other than I'm keeping track of it, if you would call that, scientific in any way. But what I did was I went out and bought some dry erase cards, and I recruited my poor husband as my tasker, and he would write the target on one side, and then I would take the card into my office and concentrate on the blank side and then write what I thought it was. So I did that for quite a while, and it was probably about a month in, and I don't have any slides prepared, but here's the target. That was a target that my husband wrote. And then here's what I got. So I was pretty impressed with that, because I got the numbers in the correct order. I didn't get the B, I got the A, and I got RT. So
Hmm.
so from that point on, I was like, game on, I'm going to do this. So I was doing it every day, and he would give me, I figured I could only handle about 4 at a time, because other than that, I started to just, you know, it takes a lot out to do more than that. So after that, sorry, I have my little notes here. Yeah, I just practiced every day. Oh, then finally my tasker decided to get kind of crazy on me, and he would make words. He would use letter or numbers as letters. Like, for instance, he would use the number 3 as an E, and I didn't like that. It was like messing with my head. It's like, no. So I just decided at that point that I would just do words. So I only did words, and I did really well. I started, my percentages started to increase. I probably got around 21%. I would do it for a week. I would total up my, you know, my numbers and my whatever they were for about a week. And I started out with doing like about 20%. And now I'm up to about 30, somewhere between 35 and 40% for a week, getting things correct.
Great.
I say correct. When I say correct, it's like, it can be, just like you said, it could be anywhere in the word, or it can be in the correct position in the word.
Yeah.
So at this point, so like about, for instance, the word was disconnect, and the word that I wrote was infection. So that would be 70%. I figured that would be 70% of the word that I got a lot of letters in there. Another word was, a target word was normal, and I wrote the word trampoline. Well, every letter is in there. So for me, that was a 100% hit, even though I didn't, you know, get it in the exact order. I got all the letters were in there. So sometimes they're scrambled around. Sometimes I get the letter in the right place. It really just depends, you know, on my day, I guess. I don't know. A few weeks ago, though, my husband wrote, here was the target word that my husband wrote was drip. And I wrote the word, I wrote drip at first, and then I put the PER. I thought, oh, it'd be fun to be dripper, but no. So I did get it. Yeah. And I wrote a couple other words too.
Fabulous.
Yeah, it's been really amazing. So let's see. Other than that, I just decided, I think the biggest factor for me was just wanting to have fun with it. I remember learning to read as a child, and I remembered how much fun it was to just learn to read. So I've sort of done the same thing. I've done all these different, like I bought, let me see if I have it. This came to me like sort of in a dream, or like a hypnagogic state. I saw this little letter, like it's a brass thing with cut out like a stencil. And I saw it, and so I went and bought it, and I just use it, and I just write the letters. You know, anything that I can do to encourage myself and foster like the love of letters again, I feel like that's really important. Let's see. I've also used a random word generator. I started doing that because I was trying to guess what my husband was writing, and it got into my head too much. So I started using a random word generator, and I've had a lot of luck with that too. And mostly you can limit the amount of letters you get, or how the length of the word is. So if you want 4 letters, you can do 4 letters. So it's been really, but that's pretty much it. There's a lot that I've done in here, but I realize we're short on time, and we're getting there. So, but
no, that's
great.
Been
my experience.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. That's
Thank
a lot.
you.
We had emailed a little bit before, but I hadn't realized the success rates you've been having, and also the fact that you've done so many different methods and add to the discussion. We really need to sum all this up, all these different methods. And I think Don asked if my slideshow is going to be available. Yes, I'm going to make that available. Also, I want to try to sum up some of the contributions that folks have been making. And I also want to add that if I'm right, if I remember right, Christine, you're also a medical transcriptionist, right?
Yeah, yeah, I
Right,
did
so-
medical transcription for 15 years.
Yeah, I did it for about 15 years too. And someone named Grin Spickett thought that maybe my own experience with medical transcription helped in remote viewing in some way. I forget specifically how, but it certainly orients us toward words. 8 hours a day or more of typing words really gets you into the groove there. And also, not only that, when you
Right.
type, your fingers know the word. Your mind may forget it, but your fingers know it. And that's part of remote viewing too, using your body. So I was curious to see that there was another medical transcriptionist here in the field. So that's great. Okay, so Julia, you're up. And do you want me to get your document up on screen or?
Actually, Des, can I share from my screen
Okay.
so that John doesn't have to worry about his window?
Yeah, you should be able to just go
Thank
straight
you.
to it.
Okay, I'll get it up here. You seeing that all right?
Not yet.
Okay, I'm going to go back and hit the share screen. Let's see here. And there we go. All right, how's that?
Yep.
All right, I'll start by saying that I used a target pool from Debra Katz's website, and that's at the top here, www.isc-learn.com. And Debra has been wonderful support. I met her in Irva and reached out to her back in June just to give me 12 target numbers for names. And I refused to even tell her how I was going to go about it because I didn't want anybody telling me that'll never work. And that was, I shouldn't have been afraid of anything. Debra never once discouraged me. She always encouraged me to do whatever came to mind here. So I am dowsing for letters, or I have been dowsing for letters. It kind of started, there were a lot of synchronicities at the end of May and early June. May 23rd, Tom McNear talked at APP about phonetics, and he almost threw out this challenge like, I dare you guys to figure out how to prompt, because he wanted to know. He had 19 of those phonetics come to him unbidden, and he would like to know how to prompt them. And so I felt like it was a personal challenge for some reason. I don't know why it was aimed at me. There must have been 200 people on that call. And just 5 days later, I finished my advanced training with Lori Williams. And that's where we learned to dowse as a phase 6 tool. I found it really very natural when people, and I don't want to talk down to anybody, but for anybody that hasn't done dowsing in CRV, that word implies using a dowsing rod, crystals, pendulums, that sort of thing. You can do it with paper and running your finger over it. The trick is, okay. You see on this first key that I have here and I'll explain why I'm using the curve here in a minute. If you're going to use this tool to find out which letter is in the word, you have to give it a cue or something they call a hook. And Lori suggested sensories, colors, smells. So I could have said, I need the first letter of this word. And one of these bubbles on this curve is going to remind me of coffee. Or one of these bubbles is going to remind me of red. And red turned out to be my best tool in the class Lori was teaching. Now, I will say, these curves and rings are my idea. I once taught that. Don't go spreading this around until somebody has some success with it. But so, what I would do is I'd take a sheet and look for the first letter by which one of these bubbles just felt red to me. Okay, I'm going to back up just a little bit more. So I was in Lori's class that weekend, and I had a stray cat of Fibonacci. put in the right-hand column, I know how to get rid of stray cats that are bugging you. I know how to disassemble it. I know how to detox from the end of a session so that it doesn't bother you the rest of the day. But at the end of her class, that Fibonacci was bugging me so much, I didn't want to let go because it was trying to tell me something. I looked it up in Wikipedia and got a chill up my spine when it said that a man named Pingala had come up with the Fibonacci sequence hundreds of years before Fibonacci did. We're talking between 200 and 400 BC. And Pingala was noted for a formula for poetry that intermingled short syllables with long syllables. And he needed the Fibonacci sequence to do that. And I thought linguistics and Fibonacci, this is where the, Tom and Lori's dowsing training and that curve in my stray cat are coming together. And it didn't, there were not too many days went by, and all of my adult life, I would get up in the morning and there would like be a word lingering in my mind. A lot of people have that hypnagogic thought before they fall off to sleep. If you have that in the morning, it's hypnopompic. And I've had that all of my life. And I, after struggling with the Fibonacci, why is that bothering me? I woke up one morning and I got the word Vogel. And I thought, well, I'm going to forget that. I don't know what Vogel means. And within a minute, I had another word, Browning. And I thought, well, that sounds like a name. I'm going to go look up Vogel and Browning on Wikipedia. There is a poem I wasn't aware of called Apt Vogel by Robert Browning. And that entire poem gave me chills because every other line would say something about phonetics and organ music and how it all plays together. And I thought, okay, this is back to my Fibonacci curve and sequences. And the line in Apt Vogel says something about naming the ineffable name. And I thought, okay, universe, you just hit me by a 2x4. So, whether it's ridiculous and unusable for anybody else or not, my brain was telling me I couldn't drop it. So these are keys that I set up. The first one, I'm calling it the TSR WF7 because this first curve, and I tried to make these pretty random, TSR and then a number 1 and then an F in that order. I didn't want it to be alphabetic. I didn't want to remember the curve. But I wanted to alternate back and forth. If I was doing 6 characters on a license plate, the next time I wanted to use a different key. So my second one was WT number 7, and then an L and a number 1. So this I used for the last few of my license plates. This ring, I just wanted to try. I tried it with 6 license plates and wasn't having much luck at all. But I began with the TSR, same sequence as this one on the left, but it's in a ring. And there's a lot of design concept here, and we don't have time to go over, but there's a reason why I went from one to the other. But like I said, this first one, I was trying to alternate so that I didn't memorize the key. The second one, I was just trying to see whether this curve was causing any bias because it draws your eye into the center. And I was afraid that I would start just picking all letters toward the center. And there was a question a minute ago about using more E's because they occur more naturally, more often in our vocabulary. With the license plate, I didn't have to worry about that sort of thing. But with this curve, I did. And I actually have plotted out the statistical, how many letters came up how many times in the 41 license plate pool. And I also plotted how many times a letter I selected came up in my sessions. And I did tend past the center of the curve to go a little bit to the right. Like there's 2 bubbles here in the middle. And my tendency, according to the graph, was to go just a little bit right. but I was getting a good number of T's and S's, and I was getting a good number of E's and D's. So I wasn't avoiding the N's, which was nice to know. And this last version was TSR, TSR, because after I had done, TSR at the top and TSR at the bottom on a ring, I wasn't having much luck. I wanted to stay with that and used it on my spiral so that we begin TSR at the top and TSR on the bottom one. And at that point, I didn't care if I memorized the curve or not. Okay, so how the process goes, I actually started a standard CRV session. I called it license plate 1, did an ideogram, got a gestalt, went into phase 2 with the sensories because the license plates all had colors and shapes and imagery that would bring on sounds and that sort of thing. So there was plenty of descriptors I could put in a P2 about a license plate without addressing the letters or numbers yet. Then I would look for an AI aesthetic impact of how I was relating to that, went into a phase 3 sketch. I just really whatever came to mind. I was trying to get past it because I did all of these sessions in under 30 minutes. It wasn't a full-blown what I would have done for a practice target. But I was going through the first 3 phases really quickly just to get to my phase 4. Once I was in phase 4, I used this and I would label it as a phase 6 tool, and I would cross-reference to the page. You can see the blank worksheet here. This isn't telling me that there's a T on the left, but after 41 targets, I knew there was a T on the left. So, I've got these blank bubbles and I ran my hand over it and just told myself one of these bubbles is red. I don't even care what character or numbers under it. One of these has got a cue me with a red, which one feels red. And you can see when I was in session here, I labeled it license plate 40. This X1 here, X2 at the bottom. So this is the first character in a license plate. Ran my head across it looking for red, checked that very quickly, went back, wrote X2, ran my hand across it very quickly, looked for the red. I was taught when you do dowsing that you don't want to linger. And then I did 2 more pages because I'd have an X3, an X4, an X5, and X6. So that would be done in session. Then I'd go to a break and check the key and begin the summary. And you can see where I've added here a slash mark with the M because I checked on the key and that check mark was right over the M. Cross-referenced it back to the page in the session. And that's for the other X2, X3, X4, X5, X6. Okay, and the results. One of the cautions I would put against anybody else trying this, unless it really feels good to you, is I was taught in the advanced class that when you have a line and you're trying to figure out like what year that the event your target is in, you might label it 100 BC to 2022. So your left is going to be 100 BC and your right is going to be 2022. In the middle, and there's somewhere is the year 1000 or 1500 or whatever you want. But I was told not to put more than 3 to 5 choices on that line because your brain does not really work like a ruler. It would, if you were headed toward the 100 BC mark, that doesn't mean it was anywhere near 100 BC. It could have been the year 999, but that you only have a certain amount of choices, and if you're trying to select a point on that line, any more than 3 choices is hard. Then you have to break it down so that your next line is only going, you either know it's low or it's high, and then you have to make another line with just that section and split it and know whether it's low or high. And you keep narrowing it down until you're in between the years 900 and 1000. So I was not taught to put 26 options on one line. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows that that is not recommended. The only reason I thought I could get away with it is this spiral is somewhat of a line, but it is also somewhat of a space, just as if you were putting a map pen where you had doused a map of New York. So, yeah, with a map of New York, your douse pen could go anywhere and nobody's worried about the infinite number of places you could put that map pen. But if it were a straight line, you have more limitations. So I was hoping that this would be a hybrid of a line over a map. And now I am a novice. You know, I just had my advanced class last May. I am not operational. I am not a scientist, but I have this obsessive compulsive problem with Fibonacci since May. So I'm so glad I worked with, asked Debra for help, because with a PhD in psychology behind you, at least she can refer me to a psychologist if this is an OCD problem. So those were the tools that I used. Here are results. Now, there were 41 license plates, and the problem being, I think I've only got like 21 listed here. You can see under my feedback column, this is what the license plate really was, REJ256 for the first one. Some of the license plates in that target pool had less than 6 characters, and some of them had more than 6 characters. And my statistics skills are not real good for mixing that kind of a variable into probability calculations. So I eliminated, after I finished all the targets, I eliminated anything that wasn't exactly 6 characters. I kept that data in case some really good statistician is willing to work with me. So the P6 is my dowsing tool, phase 6, and I wrote down the UGKQE number 0 that I got from dowsing those worksheets. You can see that I had a 0 success there. None of these letters occur there. Now, the difference between the left chart and the right chart is that the left chart is only when I had a character in the correct order, like this license plate 4. There's a VTE, but the plate was YTE. And you can see that the T and the E are in the correct positions. So I gave myself credit for 2 there. But I also had a Y out of position. So the second chart tells you that I had 3 characters without order. But the first chart tells you that only 2 of them were in order. So then you can go to the bottom of the column here, and you can see out of my 21 plates that I counted, twice I had 1 letter in order. And on one occasion, I had 2 letters in order. But I was pretty proud of the number of times I did have letters out of order. You know, twice I had 3 of the letters out of 6. I think maybe 3 letters might help a police or a detective to narrow down a license plate. Particularly if I was also able to tell him that there, you know, it had blue letters or something like that. So the other means of measurement that I wanted to go over quickly is dowsing accuracy. What I was taught in class was to take the distance from the hit. Like if it was, you know, on the map, if it was 100 miles, or let's just talk inches. You're using your ruler over a map on a sheet of paper. If I was off by an inch, you also have to consider what the largest possible error on that page is, which is some corner of the page. So you take the distance from the hit, maybe that's a poor choice of words, my selection, whatever I selected, the distance to the hit, and divide that by the greatest possible error, and that's going to give you a number under 1, you know, 0.08, whatever. And then you have to multiply that times 100 and then subtract everything in the parentheses here from 100. and that'll give you the percentage. So if you look at the selections here, this first set, all of these numbers are my 6 letters for license plate 1 in the top row, and the percent of accuracy for each letter. And I added all of those up for this first set, which was using my first key where they alternated from the beginning with a T or beginning with a W. And what I did for the second set was there were only 2 of the 6 license plates that had 6 characters. So they're the only ones I counted. And those are the accuracies for that. And I wanted to separate them to see if they were better than the first set. And then the third set is where the top and the bottom of my key page were both began with T. And those are each letter's accuracy, you know, some a lot of zeros and a high of 97. So when you put them together, what's really interesting to me is that the average changed. I actually saw an increase where the first 12 license plates, I had a 46% dowsing accuracy, but it rose to 51. And I feel like that's significant for a novice just learning dowsing and dowsing letters, which should be impossible. You know, to go from 46 to 51% at the end of the experiment. But you compare that back to this chart where you can see, you know, out of my first, you know, up to license plate 14, I didn't have a single hit in order. So it looks like there's a decline here. And even if you look at the ones out of order, I had less success toward the end of the experiment from in the front. And I thought maybe that was just a natural decline. So I was really, really curious about why I had an increase in accuracy when I had a decrease in hits. So if I could get the help of a statistician to take a closer look at this, I would love it. Now, I want to jump to the real quickly.
Julia,
Somebody mentioned Wordle.
Julia,
Yeah.
We are running low on time. I wonder if you could sum up so we can see if there are more questions. I see Henni has a question.
I definitely will. 2 people have already mentioned in chat, we should try Wordle. And I love that idea. I started this a month ago. If you look, NewYorkTimes.com, games, Wordle, index.html, it should be easy to find. I've been playing around with not using dowsing. Wordle 215, I wrote down elemental, flighty, do this funny looking sketch, went to phase 4, wrote robot-like. The word of that day was robot. If I had pulled that actual word off of my page and put it in, I would have gotten it on the first try. But no, I wrote down flight, I wrote down something else and missed not getting it first try. But it's my session, I had robot. Something else I'm trying with the Wordle is a word cloud, looking at a blank sheet of paper and just seeing what comes up to me. I'm just assuming that a word is going to float up. Having, you know, mixed results with that. And something else I'm trying is getting a dialogue in the AI and the SI column, where I said the word begins with from the AI column. Go to the SI column for the answer. It says letter I. Word ends with letters O. And yeah, this was after asking Debra and Jon for hints, and that's been helpful too. I don't always get a good hit, but I also added the cue here, word sounds like. I wrote down Offensheimer. I don't speak German, that doesn't seem to be a word, but the letter I and the letter O appeared in the Wordle answer. It was moist. So that's all I got. Everybody have fun with Wordle. I tried to do this the day before, so it's legit.
Okay, thank you, Julia. That was quite a bit of material for us to try to absorb. It will be on the recording, so people who want to go over that and try to figure it out. And as you know, I've written to you a couple of times trying to get an understanding of your method, and you clearly have some interesting stuff going on there. And I've seen online that a lot of people are playing Wordle, but let's not discuss Wordle for the rest of this. I don't know how much time we have. Daz, we have another 10 minutes or so that we can go for questions and so forth.
Yeah. However long you guys need, it's not a problem.
Okay. So thank you, Julia and everybody. Now let's move to discussion again and questions. And Henni has her hand up. So go ahead, Henni.
I am just gonna ask three questions from Julia. I think I'm understanding somewhat the technique that you are trying. I was wondering, because you were using dowsing, and dowsing is, as you said yourself, not always exactly precise. It is, giving you an approximation of where you are looking at. Have you tried to analyze your data with like the next letters? If there was a next letter match, like you might have singled out, letter S, and in the proximity there is M and N, whatever in your spiral. Have you considered seeing not only the letter that you mark, but the neighboring letters, and see how the accuracy changes if you are not only focusing on the single one that you think you picked, but on the neighbors as well? Would be my question number one. And for the decline, you mentioned that you didn't care for memorizing the pattern after a while. Could that have been the reason why you had the decline effect, because you had more of the mental processes going on?
There are so many reasons, but that's a very legitimate concern. Yeah. And see, the first part of your question about the very next letter, I actually have a pretty complicated spreadsheet where I did compare those. And like I said, I really need the help of a statistician to work some of that out. The closest I come was that if I was one space off by measuring the dowsing, one bubble away, compared to the longest possible error could have been 35 bubbles away. So I do have in that chart, if anything was, 1 out of 35, you knew that it was the closest one to 100. So all the data's there. I need help putting it together.
Okay, Don, you're up next.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I understand how your dowsing key system worked. You have a spiral there with a bunch of letters, and you chose to put some different letters in the front, TSR.
Mm-hmm.
What's all that about?
I was working without a random number generator, but there are 36 characters on each spiral, all unique. So all the letters in the top spiral are in the bottom spiral, but in a different sequence. And I just, off the top of my head, I would go left to right on the page until all the bubbles were filled.
Okay, so you're using letters and numbers because you were using license plates. Okay, got it. And then what you would do is you'd use the blank templates for your actual dowsing that would indicate a red color in one of the bubbles, which you would feel with your finger running over it.
Yes.
Okay, and then you would just tick that mark. You would compare it against the key, find out which the actual letter was at that position, and that was the one that you chose. Is that it?
That's it.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So any other comments or questions? There's some things in the chat, a couple of things. Let's see here.
I think Sasha asked if there was, how did the approach compare to maybe an approach with randomly generated numbers to match it against?
That's where I really need the part of a statistician. From what I understand is that you can have a very small effect that is actually highly significant. So if it's only 1% better than chance sometimes, and most usually worse than chance, is that 1% highly significant anyway? I don't understand that part about CRV statistics.
Maybe, do you need any help? Do you know, would you like people to help, a team or something with these kind of projects?
I really could. Maybe I should put my email in the chat.
Yeah, if you add your email to the chat there, anyone that's interested in helping can communicate with you and yeah, help you along with this, definitely.
Something that's in the chat, a question: assuming one could standardize the tasking into escalating difficulties levels, how many times would one have to run the test before the data would be considered significant? My understanding is that generally 30 to 40 data events are required to even claim any kind of statistical significance, but maybe those who are better versed can speak otherwise. But for sure, 5 or 10 doesn't get it. Like if you have 6 hits out of 10 in the IRV or something, that doesn't get it. You have to get up to at least 30 to 40, I would say. And I think statisticians differ actually on the minimum level. So that's my best answer, but I'm certainly not versed in statistics on that. Jamie, you're up.
Hi. I was just thinking that earlier I was going to say the word that I was looking for was displacement. And from my experience, I have gotten some words as displacement that that were not part of the target, but it was like right afterwards, something would happen with that theme or that word in it. And it was just, and usually I notice that I get things when they're repeated. If it's, like one time I got soccer as displacement, and then we were at the store shortly after that, and a little tiny soccer ball rolled between my feet in the cart. And then we went to Taco Bell right after that, and the whole soccer team was there, the girls' soccer team, and we had to wait for our food. So it was really funny because I was thinking that when you mentioned that earlier, John, that about maybe that she got George because it was in there 2 different Georges, that maybe if you happen to repeat part of the target that's pertinent, that maybe it would come through easier. Because I am noticing with my displacement that seems to be the case. Things that I receive or hear or see multiple times, that it comes through easier, seems like.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It points to the idea of perhaps loading the target. In other words, if it's a word and you load it in different ways, you maybe, you put a big red sign on your wall like they did at SRI, then you also repeat the word 8 times, or you memorize it, you get hypnotized. There's all kinds of ways to load the target, which I don't think has been raised before as something to do. They didn't do that in SRI. So that's a very interesting concept too, about another experiment. And I sure hope this, our time together here has motivated a few people to want to undertake some experiments, because I ain't doing no more this year. I got other things on my mind, so I'm hoping people have gotten the bug for it. So yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. So Daz, we're at 2 hours. I don't know.
Yeah, unless there's any more questions, this is usually a good time to break after 2 hours.
Yeah. I want to apologize for the slides where I guess part of it was obscured, and I will be making the PowerPoint available to anybody who wants it. I'll probably post it on my website or something.
If you want, John, if you can send me a PDF or a PowerPoint of it, when I put the YouTube video up tomorrow, I can link to that as well, if you're okay with that.
Will do, sure, yeah. So.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for participating. I think what you guys have been doing is really interesting, almost like cutting edge research, really, because we've been told by so many people for so many years that you can't RV numbers and letters, and it's most probably not the case. It's just that we need to find a way to do it, and we need to practice it.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Daz, and thanks to everybody too for listening in and taking part. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for sharing all your projects, your information, all your questions.
Thanks,
okay,
Daz.
Well, leave
Thanks,
it there
John.
for this week. Well, I might not have a chat next week. I'm trying to work on one right now for maybe 2 weeks' time with potentially Del Graff from the ex-director of Stargate on. So hopefully that'll be the next one. If anything changes before then, I'll let you guys know as soon as I can, though.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for all the help and all the participation and questions, and have a good weekend. See you next week.
All
Thanks,
right.
everyone. Good night.
Bye.
I see.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hey.